Chapter 16, Part 2 of Moonfleet. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Simon Evers. Moonfleet by J. Mead Faulkner. Chapter 16, Part 1. The Jewel. All that glisters is not gold. Shakespeare. There was the turnkey's belt lying on the floor, with the keys and manacles fixed to it, just as it had failed and come off him at the fatal moment. Elzevir picked it up, tried the keys till he found the right one, and unlocked the door of the well-house. "There are other locks to open before we get out," I said. "Ay," he answered, "but it is more than our life is worth to be seen with these keys, so send them down the well after their master." I took them back and flung them, belt and keys and handcuffs, clanking down against the sides into the blackness and the hidden water at the bottom. Then we took pail and hammer, brush and ropes, and turned our backs upon that hateful place. There was the little court to cross before we came to the door banquet hall. They were locked, but we knocked until a guard opened them. As for the plasterer men who had passed an hour before, and only asked, "Where's Ephraim?" meaning the turnkey. "He is stopping behind in the well-house," Elzevir said. And so we passed on through the hall, where the prisoners were making what breakfast they might of odds and ends, with a savoury smell of cooking and a great patter of French. At the outer gate was another guard to be passed, but they opened for us without question, cursing Ephraim under their breath that he did not take the pains to let his own men out. Then the wicket of the great gate swung to behind us, and we went into the open again. As soon as we were out of sight, we quickened our pace, and the weather having much bettered and a fresh breeze springing up, we came back to the Bugle about 10 in the forenoon. I believe that neither of us spoke a word during that walk, and though Elzevir had not yet seen the diamond, he never even took the pains to draw it out of the little parchment bag in which it still lay hid in his pocket. Yet if I did not speak, I thought, and my thoughts were sad enough. For here were we a second time, flying for our lives, and if we had not the full guilt of blood upon our hands, yet blood was surely there. So this flight was very bitter to me, because the scene of death at which I had been witness this morning seemed to take me farther still away from all my old happy life, and to stand like another dreadful obstacle between Grace and me. In the family Bible lying on the table in my aunt's best parlour was a picture of Cain, which I had often looked at with fear on wet Sunday afternoons. It showed Cain striding along in the midst of a boundless desert, with his sons and their wives striding behind him, and their little children carrying slung on poles. There was a quick swinging motion in the bodies of all, as though they must needs always stride as fast as they might, and never rest, and their faces were set hard and thin with eternal wandering and disquiet. But the thinnest and most restless-looking and hardest face was Cain's, and on the middle of his forehead there was a dark spot, which God had set to show that none might touch him, because he was the first murderer, and cursed for ever. This has always been to me a dreadful picture, that I could not choose but look at it, and was sorry indeed for Cain, for all he was so wicked, because it seemed so hard to have to wander up and down the world all his life long, and never be able to come to moorings. And yet this very thing had come upon me now, for here we were with the blood of 2 men on our hands, wanderers on the face of the earth, who durst never go home. And if the mark of Cain was not on my forehead already, I felt it might come out there at any minute. When we reached the Bugle, I went upstairs and flung myself upon the bed to try to rest a little and think. But Elzevir shut himself in with the landlord, and I could hear them talking earnestly in the room under me. After a while he came up and said that he had considered with the landlord how he could best get away, telling him that we must be off at once, but letting him suppose that we were eager to leave the place because some of the excise had got wind of our whereabouts. He had said nothing to our host about the turnkey, wishing as few persons as possible to know of that matter, but doubted not that we should by all means hasten our departure from the island, for that as soon as the turnkey was missed, inquiry would certainly be made for the plasterers with whom he was last seen. Yet in this thing at least fortune favoured us, For there was now lying at Cowes, and ready to sail that night, a Dutch cooper that had run a cargo of Hollands on the other side of the island, and was going back to Scheveningen freighted with wool. Our landlord knew the Dutch captain well, having often done business for him, and so could give us letters of recommendation which would ensure us a passage to the Low Countries. Thus in the afternoon we were on the road, making our way from Newport to Cowes in a new disguise, for which we had changed our clothes again, and now wore the common sailor dress of blue. The clouds had returned after the rain, and the afternoon was wet and worse than the morning, so I shall not say anything of another weary and silent walk. We arrived on Cowes Quay by 8 in the evening, and found the cooper ready to make sail, and waiting only for the tide to set out. Her name was the Guden Droom, and she was a little larger than a Bonaventure, but had a smaller crew, and was not near so well found. Elzevir exchanged a few words with the captain, and gave him the landlord's letter, and after that they let us come on board, but said nothing to us. We judged that we were best out of the way, so went below, and finding her laden deep, and even the cabin full of bales of wool, flung ourselves on them to rest. I was so tired and heavy with sleep that my eyes closed almost before I was lain down, and never opened till the next morning was well advanced. I shall not say anything about our voyage, or how we came safe to Scheveningen, because it had little to do with our story. Elzevir had settled that we should go to Holland, not only because the cooper was waiting to sail thither, for we might doubtless have found other boats before long to take us elsewhere, but also because he had learned at Newport that the Hague was the first market in the world for diamonds. This he told me after we were safe housed in a little tavern in the town, which was frequented by seamen, but those of the better class, such as mates and skippers of small vessels. Here we lay for several days, while Elzevir made such inquiry as he could without waking suspicion as to who were the best dealers in precious stones, and the most able to pay a good price for a valuable jewel. It was lucky too for us that Elzevir could speak the Dutch language, not well indeed, but enough to make himself understood, and to understand others. When I asked him where he had learned it, he told me that he came of Dutch blood on his mother's side, and so got his name as Elzevir, and that he could once speak in Dutch as readily as in English, only that his mother dying when he was yet a boy, he lost something of the facility. As the days passed, the memory of that dreadful morning at Carisbrooke became dimmer to me, and my mind more cheerful or composed. I got the diamond back from Elzevir, and had it out many times, both by day and by night, and every time it seemed more brilliant and wonderful than the last. Often of nights, after all the house was gone to rest, I would lock the door of the room and sit with a candle burning on the table, and turn the diamond over in my hands. It was, as I have said, as big as a pigeon's egg or walnut, delicately cut and faceted all over, perfect and flawless, without speck or stain, and yet, for all it was so clear and colourless, there flew out from the depth of it such flashes and sparkles of red, blue, and green, as made one wonder whence these tints could come. Thus, while I sat and watched it, I would tell Elzevir stories from the Arabian Nights, of wondrous jewels, though I believe there never was a stone that the eagles brought up from the Valley of Diamonds, no, nor any in the Caliph's crown itself, that could excel this gem of ours. Sure that at such times we talked much of the value that was to be put upon the stone, and what was likely to be got for it, but never could settle, not having any experience of such things. Only I was sure that it must be worth thousands of pounds, and so sat and rubbed my hands, saying that though life was like a game of hazard, and our throws had hitherto been bad enough, yet we had made something of this last. But all the while a strange change was coming over us both, and our parts seemed turned about, for whereas a few days before it was I who wished to fling the diamond away, feeling overwrought and heavy-hearted in that awful well who held me from it, now it was he that seemed to set little store by it, and I to whom it was all in all. He seldom cared to look much at the jewel, and one night when I was praising it to him, spoke out, "Set not thy heart too much upon this stone. It is thine, and thine to deal with. Never a penny will I touch that we may get for it. Yet were I thou, and reached great wealth with it, and so came back one day to Moonfleet